All right, let's get a few more in here. This is Schaeffer Cox Papers number 21. Shifting Theories. The truth is, the governments couldn't get a bill of particulars on counts 12 and 16 because the defendants just hadn't conspired to murder anybody. This may be a big deal on direct. The judge denied the defense's motion for a bill of particulars, claiming it was informally resolved, but there never was a straight answer given on what the government was considering a conspiracy to murder. Before trial, they told Dooley it was the fact that security was present at KJNP. But why then would they need Mike Anderson to testify to the grand jury in order to get a true bill on conspiracy to murder? Anderson was in no way remotely connected to KJNP, which is King Jesus North Pole. And why would the government wait a year and a half to indict Cox and Barney for the KJNP security detail when the government knew everything about the whole thing before and as it happened? During trial, the government saw that nobody was buying the KJNP theory, and then when evidence such as the whiteboard was unequivocally stated, allow peaceful arrest and don't shoot unless life is in danger, was admitted along with testimony from the vice president of KJNP, that they had been asked if it was okay to post security and that KJNP had given them permission. It was clear the KJNP theory was dead on arrival. Halfway through trial, the government abandoned the KJNP theory and switched to the 241 theory. 241 stands for retaliating on the government with 2 times the force inflicted on any of the people. If the only theory submitted to the grand jury was KJNP, it creates structural error as to all other theories presented at trial. Aside from that, there are other major flaws in the 241 theory. First, it would put at issue the likelihood that someone would be murdered by the government, thus this triggering the retaliation. Second, and more importantly, J.R. Olson is who brought it up and pushed it on several occasions, and each time it came up, Cox and Barney soundly rejected 241, calling it a horrible idea. This left the government with having to fight to keep out the over 40 separate audio clips of 241 and any sort of violence being rejected, while at the same time making a big deal to the jury out of the fact that the defendants talked about it. Witnesses were questioned ad nauseum about what did the defendants talk about, but when the objections went off like fireworks, when they were asked what did they decide after talking about it, again state of mind evidence was excluded. Another big problem with the 241 theory is that Vernon was not aware of it or party to any of those conversations. This makes it difficult for him to be a conspirator. The reason Vernon was not privy to those conversations is because J.R. Olson was running the same game on the Vernons parallel to Cox and Barney. If J.R. Olson brought up 241 to Cox and Barney in front of the Vernons would see 241 shot down by Cox and Barney. This could undermine J.R. Olson's progress towards convincing the Vernons to plot an attack of some sort on their own. 241 suffered its final blow when Tim Dooley put Coleman Barney on the stand and offered numerous audios and transcripts of Barney denouncing violence and urging J.R. Olson to do the same. Numerous similar audios exist for Cox, but Traverso failed to offer them, and when Dooley tried to offer them for Cox, the judge sustained the government's hearsay objection. Nonetheless, the government was now left with Barney out of the conspiracy. No tapes of Cox agreeing to it, and no tapes of Cox and anyone else even talking about it. The next tactic employed by the government was to build a case by getting the jury to accept the presumption of a non-existent hit list. Let us be clear. There never was a hit list of any kind ever. It only existed as something the government made repeated reference to but never produced. The defendants, who did have the contact information of numerous government offices and employees, many of whom were supportive of the cause of protecting people's rights of government transparency and accountability to the people. Others were corrupt and needed to be exposed for their involvement in illegal activities such as police drug trafficking. But there is nothing anywhere that suggests that any of these government people were going to be murdered. It's just not there. And on top of that glaring absence of proof, there is an abundance of proof that Cox and Barney were totally unwilling to act aggressively towards anyone. See audios of 241 would be fruitless. I'm going to be like Gandhi, not Rambo. We need to stay away from Fulton and Bennett. I'm leaving the country with my family. I don't have hatred for anyone. What the government did was have the FBI go to people like Trina Bucamp and others and tell them the straight up lie that they were on a hit list of people that Schaeffer Cox was out to murder. Then they asked them how they felt about being on Schaeffer Cox's hit list. They would cry and say how scared they were, but that was all from FBI lies, not evidence. The government did instruct J.R. Olson to get the defendants to make a list of The government did instruct J.R. Olson to get the defendants to make a list of get one. But the more J.R. Olson pushed, the more Cox and Barney pushed back, and the faster they made arrangements to get Cox out of the country. The hit list lost its last leg when the government star witness, Mike Anderson, took the stand and flipped to the defense by testifying that Cox had no intentions to murder anyone, that any information we had was for political purposes, and that everyone was scared of Bill Fulton, who was pushing violence. By the end of the trial, the AUSAs had done everything they could to prejudice the jury while hiding/denying the fact that Cox had told the informants no and done the right thing by walking away. But for all of this, the heart of a conspiracy is still in agreement, and the defendants hadn't agreed to anything except that they needed to have a policy of staying away from Aaron Bennett and his pack, and that Cox needed to move out of the country for his safety. Cox had given J.R. Olson dozens of reasons why not to act violently. It would send the wrong message to the public. It would orphan our children. It would make martyrs out of corrupt people. It would just be looking for a fight. The system will fall apart without our help. We need to build good. We need to build good, not tear down bad. No one would see us as martyrs. It would not be self-defense. We need to be like Gandhi, not Rambo. Leaving the country has the brightest future for our family. And on it goes for 200 hours of recordings. J.R. Olson didn't get it. J.R. Olson just didn't get it, or so the defendants thought. So with J.R. Olson still pushing and Fulton vowing to kill Cox if he didn't agree to plot violence, Cox offered the reasoning that even if they wanted to attack the government, they weren't capable of doing so for more than a few disastrous minutes. Cox said they would get squashed like bugs if they tried. Cox's final attempt to reason with Olson boiled down to basically, look, if I had the power to force the government to obey the Constitution and respect the people's rights, I would. But I don't. None of us do. So until that changes, all we can do is run away and regroup later. AUSA Scrocky seized on this for his closing argument. He triumphantly proclaimed to the jury that this whole case is about when we're ready, when we're strong enough, and when Schaeffer Cox finally gets enough power to force the government to obey the law as he sees it. He would if he could, ladies. He would if he could, ladies and gentlemen. But when you extricate the logic from Scrocky's disingenuous grandstanding, what he's basically claiming is that the defendants did the right thing for the wrong reason, that they hadn't conspired because they weren't strong enough to do anything, but that someday, somehow, if conditions were right, they would. But there's no such thing as conspiracy to conspire, and at the end of all the finger-pointing and name-calling, every theory of conspiracy the government could bring is going to be eviscerated by the inescapable fact that Cox said no, packed up his family, and was leaving the country. Number 22, Bucamp flipped. Trina Bucamp, who was told by the FBI that she was targeted for murder before she took the stand, is a family friend of Cox. She flew down to the sentencing of Cox and was very upset and confused. She visited Cox at jail and said that none of what she was told was adding up. She said she didn't even know that Cox was trying to leave the country, or that undercovers were using death threats to try and bully Cox into plotting a crime. Cox assured Bucamp that he loved her and her family and would never think of doing anything to harm her. Bootcamp said he loved Cox. Bootcamp said she loved Cox like a brother and wanted to do everything she could to sort this out. She said that she wanted Cox out of prison and back with his wife and children. She said she wanted to have Schaeffer and Marty Cox over for dinner when this was all over. Bootcamp would likely supply an affidavit detailing how she was misled by the FBI and how that influenced her testimony at trial, especially if she was allowed to see evidence that contradicts the fish story the FBI gave her. An attorney or investigator needs to follow up on this before the opening brief is filed. Number 23. AUSA Cooper flipped. The AUSA in Fairbanks is Steve Cooper. Cox and Cooper were friends and went to lunch together now and then. Cox respects and admires Cooper and sought his advice on many things. Cooper was generally supportive of what Cox was working towards politically. Early on, when Aaron Bennett was pushing for violent extremism and anti-government aggression, Cox told Cooper about Bennett and explained that his ideas ran afoul of Cox's ideals of community-minded self-sufficiency and self-defense for the purpose of peace and safety. Cooper advised Cox that whether Cox liked it or not, if people like Bennett would listen to Cox, Cox had an obligation to cool those people down. Cox took this advice to heart and tried to temper hotheads like Bennett, that is, until Bennett started to make threats to kill Cox for putting the brakes on violence. During the investigation, Cooper tried to convince Scrocky that Cox should be left alone because he wasn't doing anything illegal. Cooper testified for the defense at trial. He was prepared to testify that Cox had expressed his concern about violent people like Bennett and that Cox had asked for advice. Government hearsay objections prevented this. It was also evident from Cooper's testimony that he had been lied to about a hit list by the FBI. Cooper is in his late 70s, ready to retire, unsympathetic to the corruption in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and would likely assist if shown the truth and asked to help. Cooper no doubt knows of Brady violations and may just need an excuse to disclose them. He needs to be contacted before the opening brief is filed. Number 24. KJNP, which stands for King Jesus North Pole, juror letter. Prior to Barney's sentencing, a juror sent a letter to the judge that stated, among many other things, that the jury categorically rejected the KJNP conspiracy theory. The judge furnished this letter to all parties, and Peter Camiel cited it in his sentencing memorandum for Cox. This would strengthen arguments on constructive amendments to the indictment during trial. That creates structural error. Schaeffer Cox Papers, number 25. Camiel knows Bennett, a CI. Peter Camiel found a text message in Bates' documents that roughly read, Sergeant Scott Johnson, Fairbanks, PD, do you see what Aaron Bennett said on the front page of the paper today? I can't believe this guy. I say we give him back to ATF and just wash our hands of him. The government would neither confirm nor deny when asked if Bennett was an operative. Bennett is a central figure in the case, and it is a behemoth Brady violation to not disclose him. He was the first to contact Cox in 2008 and propose violence. This would roll back the time before which the government must show pre-existing disposition to rebut an entrapment defense. Redacted. Cox is heard repeatedly expressing his fear that Bennett would start violence and advising others to stay completely away from Aaron and his pack and to just be polite enough not to set him off. The non-disclosure of Bennett is far from a harmless Brady violation. I need to look up what a Brady violation is. Hold on just a second. Need to write that down. What is a... Need to investigate Brady violation. All right. Number 26. 4 related cases reversed on Brady violations. 4 other political cases brought by the same Polar Pen. Oh, we got to investigate Polar Pen too. Okay. Brought by the same Polar Pen team that did the Cox case were all remanded on Brady violations and subsequently resolved with time-served deals. Pete Cott, Vic Colrig, Bruce Wayrock and Ted Stevens were all railroaded as part of the same politically driven roundup of conservative libertarian figures that snared Cox. A limited remand to the district court to determine the materiality of Brady violations would be a well-beaten path to resolution. Talk to Michael Filipovic and Cheryl Gordon McLeod, federal defender, Seattle, who did this in previous cases. Number 27, redacted a CHS. I think CHS, I'm not 100% sure. I think it stands for Confidential Human Source. A CHS redacted is believed to be another undisclosed informant. Redacted contacted Cox in summer of 2010 during the Fed's attempt to provoke an uprising by going after Cox's baby son Seth. Redacted was doggedly persistent in seeking employment by Cox. Cox eventually did hire Redacted and put him to work doing hard manual labor. Redacted volunteered that he could get Cox C4 explosives and could also arrange a murder for hire for $5,000. Cox did not respond to either of these offers, and Redacted was not pushy or intimidating. Cox explained that he wanted to be prepared against disaster and to get along with everyone in the meantime. Nothing more, nothing less. Redacted made no further offers of illegal or shifty opportunities. Number 28 is completely redacted. Number 29. Mayor Cox will help. The FBI tried to coerce Mayor Cox, Schaeffer Cox's older sister, into testifying against her brother. They subpoenaed her, flew her to Anchorage during the trial, then showed her transcripts of things she had supposedly said about her brother earlier when interviewed by the FBI. The things they told her she had said were not what she had said at all. When Mayor Cox told the FBI that the transcripts, most likely trumped up 302s, were not accurate, did not reflect her thinking, and that she would not validate them on the stand, the FBI told her that she had to take the stand and give testimony consistent with the written report the FBI put in front of her, or else face prosecution for giving false statements to the FBI. Mayor became very upset, told them they couldn't prosecute her for making false statements because she hadn't made the statements they were telling her she had, and that she wanted to talk to a lawyer. At this, the FBI put her on a plane and flew her out of the state right away. She did not testify, and she was not bothered by the FBI anymore. Schaeffer Cox wanted to have her return and testify about the government's trying to coerce perjury, but Traverso wouldn't allow any money to be spent on flying witnesses up until redacted. Number 30. Oh, Mayor is worth calling. Number 30. False affidavits by S/A Sutherland. All of the warrantless searches and in-home audio and video recordings the investigation conducted are illegal for the purposes of the State of Alaska case. In an effort to save the state case, S/A Sutherland wrote a completely false affidavit claiming that the investigation was purely a federal one, that no state agencies had assisted, and that the warrantless and protracted monitoring were therefore not the fruit of illegal searches conducted by state actors. This is a knowingly false affidavit by S.A. Sutherland. The investigation was conducted primarily by the state drug cop who Cox was trying to expose for illicit drug trafficking and sales. They gave J.R. Olson to S.A. Sutherland because they couldn't run someone in on Cox with no reasonable suspicion under state law, whereas apparently the feds can do it all day long. Where this becomes relevant on direct appeal is when the defense must show a reason other than Traverso's corrupt incompetence for not uncovering additional CIs like Bennett, Morris, Menino. If S.A. Sutherland's sworn affidavit was relied on in good faith, and as such prevented discovery requests from being made to state actors working in collusion with the FBI, then the false affidavit resulted in prejudice to the defendant. Jinx Act material given to the defense during trial contains oodles of documents showing extensive state involvement. I'll stop for now and we'll start again later.